So welcome, gentlemen. Thanks for joining the 5-minute update. This is going to be another either a webinar or podcast or both for the high-tech sector of the LES licensing, that is the Licensing Executive Society of USA Canada. And we've got today John Carney, Amir Ghavi, and Jason Schwartz. And I'm Dave Powsner. Topic today is a hot one, I guess, maybe too hot, which is FTX and cryptocurrency. I don't know about Amir. John and I know I dabble in it, and I know a little about it. John probably knows what I do, and more. Amir, I don't know, but Jason is an expert, and so we will pepper him with questions and pretend to have a conversation, but in point of fact, we'll simply be learning from him as much as we can. So to get this thing going, Jason, tell us about cryptocurrency. What is it? Didn't think we were going to start with that one.
That's a loaded question right there.
Very foundational, yeah.
Yeah. So for those who aren't familiar with crypto, you can think of cryptocurrency as bits of information that are stored on a decentralized ledger. So, whereas when you have a checking account on your banking website, what that means is that your bank has sort of has its own internally maintained ledger or database where it records, the assets of each of its, clients, and you have to trust the bank to properly record that data and, properly correct that data as necessary. By contrast, at least, public blockchains, which are, typically what people are referring to when they refer to cryptocurrency, are distributed ledgers. And the first public blockchain, at least the first, public blockchain at scale, was Bitcoin. And really the only information recorded on that blockchain is how much Bitcoin each person has. So, there's this distributed ledger basically maintained by all of the users of the Bitcoin blockchain collectively. All of their computers basically are keeping track of the ledger at the same time. And those computers are keeping track of who owns what Bitcoin. More modern blockchains enable the recordation and maintenance of records relating to all types of information. It can be cryptocurrency like Bitcoin, but it can also be NFTs, which might represent IP rights and property, or or images, or sort of title to property. Could be sort of stock-like instruments. It could be stable coins, which are in theory backed by real-world assets. It could be sort of credentials, like even your social media data can be recorded on a blockchain like that. So
Ethereum is, what is it? Ethereum is one of the popular one of that flavor as opposed to Bitcoin.
Ethereum is the largest blockchain other than Bitcoin, and by far the largest smart contract blockchain, meaning that it can basically keep track of any information that you can imagine.
So, the appeal of at least Bitcoin and maybe Ethereum, but the appeal of Bitcoin, I gather, was the lack of information, or I guess two things, which is the lack of information, which was also a little scary, but also the fact that it reaches across borders and you can do transactions worldwide, presumably quickly, reasonably quickly.
I would say there are three reasons that a blockchain's sort of native tokens have value. And when I say native tokens, what I mean is whenever you set up a blockchain, there's one token that sort of represents that blockchain's native token, right? The token that is you could sort of think of it as the first token tradable on that blockchain, or the currency of that blockchain. On Bitcoin, the token is synonymous with the blockchain. It's Bitcoin because, again, the Bitcoin blockchain, all it does is enable transfers of Bitcoin. And the reason that Bitcoin has value, there are three reasons. Number one, Bitcoin can be held as a bearer asset instead of through a financial institution. So that means that it's people refer to that as permissionlessness, right? You don't need the permission of some third party to hold Bitcoin.
Like cash.
Like cash, exactly. Number two, Bitcoin is freely transferable, again, without needing an intermediary. So in that sense, it's trustless. So I can transfer Bitcoin to someone in another country. We don't have to agree to trust one of our native financial institutions, which historically has been really, really difficult for parties dealing, let's say, China and the U.S. or something. Right. You could sort of bypass financial intermediaries. Number three is that Bitcoin cannot be frozen or seized, so it's censorship resistant. So permissionless, trustless, and censorship resistant are the three sort of core characteristics of a native crypto.
Okay, so unlike sort of a regular country's currency, which I think is called fiat currency, and however many countries there are, I think it's well above, was it around 200 or something or more, 2 something or other, 237, whatever.
I think you're right for it.
There are that many fiat currencies, presumably. And then you've got all the exchange issues as well as the issues of, there's probably, I don't know if they're tariff issues, but I don't know, can you just fly into any country you want with a bunch of US dollars, or do you run into customs in every country?
They have to be declared.
Okay.
Yeah, it'll depend on the country, but typically there would be issues with transferring fiat currency.
Bitcoin, at least Bitcoin and all, and I assume all of the cryptocurrencies try to avoid that. That is, cryptocurrencies are largely, other than was it Ecuador or something? Somebody recognizes cryptocurrency as a real currency, but other than them, cryptocurrencies you can move around with in your pocket, and you probably don't even have to move in order to use it in another country.
Well, there's no concept of holding a crypto in your pocket because they're digital assets. But one benefit of so ownership of crypto, when you self-custody or hold it as a bearer asset, really means that there's something analogous to a post office box, which is, you could think of it as like a locus on the blockchain, and that's your sort of public, that's like your public sort of tracker, right? If I want you to send some Bitcoin to me, I will give you my public address, right? Like my PO box. And why is that mine? What does it mean for me to own the assets at that locus? What it means is that I'm the only person who knows the password that enables me to move the assets that are there, right? Now, there are some real concerns with that. The biggest concern is, what that means is that if my password gets compromised, if Amir learns my password, suddenly I'm not the owner anymore, because he can go in and move, that Bitcoin or that Ether or whatever the token is to his wallet, and that transaction would be irreversible, right?
But let me back this up. I think what I'm driving at, and everyone else feel free to chime in, is there's this stuff out there, whether you call it's cryptocurrency, basically. Bitcoin's a famous one. There's this stuff out there, digital stuff out there that we're able to use as a form of currency that has a huge advantage. There's no shortage of disadvantages, but it's got a huge advantage over regular currency. It moves quickly through commerce. At least within most countries, you can readily convert it to the local currency, and if you can't do it in your own country, you can do it in some other country, and then use their fiat dollars to convert it to your own. So it's as good as money, though it can be a little more difficult to turn liquid. And it's generally not trackable, so it's would a phrase be self-laundering?
I think it's an overstatement to say that it's not trackable. The way I get onto the Ethereum blockchain is through a centralized exchange like Coinbase, and so I will transfer fiat into Coinbase. That'll clear through Coinbase. Coinbase is just a regular U.S. financial institution. I'll then through Coinbase buy Ether, and then I'll transfer that Ether to self-custody, right? To my wallet or PO box, right? You might not know the identity behind that wallet, right? My public wallet, for what it's worth, is called cryptotaxguy.e. So you might not happen to know that crypto tax guy is Jason Schwartz, but Coinbase certainly does, because they've seen me withdraw my my Ether to that wallet. And if Coinbase does, then so does the US government, right? So I think it's a little bit of an overstatement to say that it's laundering. It's just the obfuscation of my identity behind a public key to the rest of the world just enables me to retain my privacy vis-a-vis the average citizen, but not.
Let's explore that just before we go too much further. I don't want to get down this rat hole, but when crypto was becoming popular a decade ago, 2 decades ago, I thought one of the big features was it was not trackable, and you're saying it is. And it's not just you. I think I read in the Times the other day that it sounded like it takes a while, but the feds can track you, Bitcoin and everything else. It just sounds like a pain in the butt, and but they can get there.
Yeah, they're getting there. We can go again. This is a topic that can last an entire another podcast, because there are these privacy enhancing tools called zero knowledge proofs. That Tornado Cash was one example of that, but OFAC sanctioned Tornado Cash. But there are other things like Aztec, which is a layer 2 of Ethereum. There are entire blockchains built on zero knowledge proof, like Zcash and Monero. And zero knowledge proofs basically enable you to better obfuscate your identity.
Okay. Okay. That's good enough. So there's this stuff you can carry in your digital wallet, or you don't have to carry. You can use it like currency. It can be a little more difficult to turn liquid. But on the other hand, some people don't require the liquid asset. You can sometimes pay for a bottle of, you can pay for gin, Coke, and everything else, the drinkable Coke. Though maybe both forms are now drinkable, using this stuff, which is great. So it has a lot of advantage. It has some weird aspect, which brings us a little closer to FTX, which is that its value is seemingly less stable, maybe not less stable than some fiat currencies, but less stable than the dollar. And that's because not only is it, and this is the kind of confusing part, is not only does it seem like it can be used as a currency, it's also often an investment for all the ups and downs.
Yeah, that's right. So in the case of so in the case of the native token of a blockchain, again like Ether or Bitcoin, not only does it have the 3 sort of characteristics, trustlessness, permissionlessness, and censorship resistance that I described, but also the point of being a native token is that it does have utility. The utility is that in order to actually do a transaction on the blockchain, like on Ethereum, if I want to send you a stable coin, I have to pay a transaction fee to the network, and the transaction fee is denominated in Ether. So in that sense, Ether has utility. It's it's literally gas. That's why it's called Ether. It's like the gas that runs the blockchain. But what that means is that I can speculate on Ether by saying, well, the more people who use Ethereum, the blockchain, the more valuable Ether is going to be, right? So in effect, Ether becomes this investment with, in fact, cash flows, like fundamentals. But a lot of this is speculative, right? We're all sort of looking 10 years into the future, and and making bets on how many people are going to use Ethereum and the blockchain, and accordingly how valuable Ether ought to be.
Okay, so That and so the appeal to a lot. So the appeal of blockchain currency or cryptocurrency to some people is it's ready transferability, use worldwide, et cetera, et cetera. Also, the potential upside of it is its value can go up many-fold in one day. Usually doesn't, and it can also go down in one day. When you talk about utility, it reminds me of at least the SEC, that is the regulatory aspects, but I don't think that's what you're driving at. But it turns out that the feds, I don't know, at least the US federal government, and I assume the European governments and the like are the same. The feds are probably less care about crypto's sort of cash and currency aspect, but are much more concerned about its security aspect, which is people get into it. Maybe they get into it so they can do transactions on the dark web. But some people and a lot of people are getting into it because its value can go up so readily. And yet it doesn't seem to be a regulated security, though people are buying it and they think it's a security. The feds aren't able to regulate it like one is, or at least they're not willing to yet, I gather. And they may get there because it has both security aspects and currency aspects. And sort of therein lies the problem with it. Is that a fair summary? Which is it's got to be both things, which are typically highly regulated, and yet the feds can't get their handle on it, and so they're unwilling to recognize it at all.
Well,
that.
Yeah, I mean, I think there was a lot in what you just said, but I will note. So there are these rules, right? The securities rule, and I'm a tax lawyer, by the way, not a securities lawyer, but I know enough securities law to be dangerous. And basically, if something is a security or investment contract, then it's subject to all these regulations around disclosure, and the issuer has to provide disclosure to investors, and and has to provide that sort of periodically, and has to avoid conflicts of interest and what have you. Now, what is an investment contract or security? An investment contract or security is an investment or contract or scheme involving an investment of money in a common enterprise with the expectation of profit to be derived from the efforts of others. Okay, that's called the Howey test, and everyone in crypto, can sort of recite the Howey test by heart at this point. The problem with, or not a problem, but the issue you run into in analyzing whether a token, and particularly a token like Ether, is a security, is that because it's decentralized, it's not clear that there's any contract transaction of scheme. In other words, there's no sort of central body promising that Ether's value is going to go up, or that some issuing company is going to do stuff that improves the value of Ether. Ether is so decentralized, you or I or anyone can join the Saturday morning calls among developers talking about what the next steps ought to be for the Ethereum ecosystem. Anyone can participate. So it's not clear that there's any sort of contract or transaction or scheme. There's certainly an investment of money, not clear that there's any common enterprise, and not clear that there's any sort of efforts of others. It's more efforts of the community. There's, lots more I can say about that.
So what you're addressing is why at least the Securities and Exchange Commission here, and probably in Europe, their equivalent or equivalents, are unwilling to treat it like a regular security and regulate it at all.
No, I would say that differently. Gary Gensler repeatedly asserts that virtually all virtual currencies are securities, and he's not going to, the SEC is not going to provide additional guidance on, how to deal with crypto, because the guidance has existed for 90 years and the law is what it is. The fact of the matter is, though, that in fact, there's a real question as to whether tokens are securities. Many tokens, I would say, aren't. I would say Ether is likely not a security. Bitcoin is likely not a security. Number two, even if you determine that a token was a security, the current rules for disclosure are simply don't work for crypto. Like it's unclear who the issuer is. It's unclear, who's supposed to provide disclosure. It's unclear what kind of disclosure ought to be provided. So the fact of the matter is that the regulators, have just demonstrated in the U.S. largely an unwillingness to engage with the community, and I think it's a dramatic failure on the part of U.S. regulators. I would actually say that the European regulators have done a lot better.
So that's a great point, which is, at least from the U.S. perspective, it is a security because people are buying it under the, Howey test.
The SEC has not actually provided, as far as I can tell, a good argument for why they passed the Howey test. Only sort of broad statements by Chair Gary Gensler that these are securities. And in fact, Gary Gensler, in his statements, has sort of ignored the Howey test and just said, people are buying them with the expectation of profit, so they're securities.
Okay,
which is kind of unbelievable, because that would make like any commodity like oil or gold a security, and we know that it's not.
Okay, but be that as it may, they're treating it as a security, and so I guess then, since it's a security, it must be regulated, but they're the U.S., the SEC is unwilling to, though it's a regulated item, they're unwilling to let an exchange that is some sort of marketplace where these things can come and go. They're unwilling to put their stamp of approval on, say, FTX or Ethereum or any of the others, which they theoretically could do if they would accept a registration. And is that what leads us out of the country to the Bahamas with FTX?
It largely is, yeah. So I mean, we do have we do have U.S. exchanges, right? We have Coinbase, Kraken, Gemini. Those are U.S. exchanges.
Oh, they are. Okay.
They're all operating under kind of this fear that they're operating this illegal exchange. Now what's somewhat ironic is that, notwithstanding the SEC's constant or at least Chair Gensler's constant attacks, saying that crypto is all securities, the SEC has not gone after these exchanges for offering securities, unregistered securities, in violation of the law. Instead, what the SEC has done is gone after parties and sort of asserted baldly that securities, that's certain crypto is securities. So, for example, there was an insider trading case involving a former Coinbase employee, and the SEC, filed charges against that person for wire fraud and securities fraud, asserting that a number of the tokens that person was trading in were securities, and those tokens are offered by Coinbase. But neither Coinbase nor the anyone related to those tokens was named a party to that action by the SEC.
So you're saying that
actually able to defend themselves.
You're saying that. So I'm certainly no securities lawyer, but I gather that if you want to register a security, you've got to file a big chunk of paperwork.
Yeah,
you're saying Coinbase and the like did not do that?
Correct.
Then why is FTX in the Bahamas? Well, what was FTX?
I think there are a few answers to that. So number one is, there is an entity, FTX US, that is located in the United States, and US people were permitted to open accounts at FTX US, and did. Lots of US people had accounts with FTX US. The main FTX, or the FTX that had the most amount of global business, was in the Bahamas. And one of the reasons is that in addition to its sort of saber rattling around cryptos being securities, the SEC has also not permitted the offering of certain yield-bearing products by exchanges, and in fact, did not permit Coinbase to offer a yield-bearing product that they applied for. Sued and won or settled against BlockFi for a huge amount of money for offering a yield-bearing product. So in general, it's very difficult to compete against other exchanges if you're in the U.S. and those non-U.S. exchanges are offering products that simply can't be offered in the U.S.
Okay, so FTX is what's the difference between an exchange and a cryptocurrency?
Yeah. So remember how we talked about self-custody means basically that I have my PO box and I have the key to that PO box. The key being this very long password. And the best way to make sure that password doesn't get compromised is I literally write it down with a pen and paper, right? I don't put it in an email or anywhere where it could get hacked. I write it down with a pen and paper.
Can you show us?
And then I store that information in a safe at home, or maybe ironically in a safety deposit box at a bank or something. Now, a lot of people simply don't want to undertake that bit of operational security, right? They don't trust themselves to securely store their password. Or they're just too lazy, right? Like they don't want to deal with opening up their own, PO box, effectively their own crypto wallet, and writing down the password. So, and maybe those people, heard about crypto from, their friends and heard that it might be a way to make a quick buck, and they just want exposure to the crypto without actually having to do the work of self-custodying it. And for those people, a centralized exchange seems to make a lot of sense, right? It's just like your Fidelity account holding stocks. You're very accustomed to the notion of someone else holding something for you. And if you're not really like part of the whole crypto ethos of, self-sovereignty, but you just want to see the number go up, it might make sense to just ask FTX to buy crypto for you and keep a private ledger in which they, say, Jason Schwartz owns 5 ETH, right?
What's a distributed exchange versus a centralized exchange? Where does FTX fit into that?
Yeah, so there are such things as decentralized exchanges that that use basically smart contracts or software programs to enable me to exchange ETH for a stable coin and vice versa. Trade tokens. Those are all done purely self-custodially with no intermediary. And, we can go through the tech, but it's not that important for this podcast, I think. What's more important to understand is just that if I'm in self-custody, I'm able to do stuff with my tokens, basically banking things, without ever relying on a centralized intermediary to do them. And I can literally see where my tokens are on the blockchain at all times. And the only way that I can sort of like lose my tokens is if there's a bug in the system, right? Or if I lose my password, if I lose my private key. By contrast, when you're dealing with centralized intermediaries like FTX or like Voyager or like Celsius or like BlockFi,
or Coinbase,
you have to trust that they are actually holding the crypto on your behalf that they claim to be holding on your behalf. So you're back to relying on a banking system, which crypto, is just sort of ironic because crypto was intended to allow people to get out of the banking system.
Well, I read an article last week or the week before. What are they called? The crypto family. And they posted a picture of themselves all looking very tan, blonde and tan on a beach. And then as you read the article, you realized this guy had to stash. He doesn't believe in exchanges. And so he's apparently started investing. He put all of his savings in, was it 2007 or 6 or 5 or something, into this stuff. So he's, I guess, quite wealthy by crypto standards. But the way he lives is apparently he either owns whole islands or he has portions of islands all around the world, and he buries his password like a squirrel in all those places. And it sounds like wherever he lives at the moment must be heavily guarded so that somebody can't come in and pull his fingernails out and ask what the current password is. So, I mean, I got to tell you, that makes the whole notion of decentralization sound less appealing to me. I think I'd rather walk down to the bank.
Yeah, I mean, there are many other options, right? So like there are now wallets that include something called social recovery, where I can name let's say the three of you to be the guardians of my.
I wouldn't trust John.
Right, but and there are ways to ensure that tech is developing to enable, to allow people to recover passwords if they lose them, or like have their tokens transferable to a new wallet if they lose their password or whatever. But yeah, I mean, in the old days, meaning, as little as a year ago, even, really the only option was to write down your password, right?
Okay, so how did Sam? Is it Bankman-Fried or Fried-Bankman?
No, Bankman-Fried, SBF.
Bankman-Fried, of FTX. How did he get into this mess? And to jump ahead, he's in the Bahamas with this completely unregulated company hanging out in a beach house with these kids, and the Bahamas has no control of that, or what's the deal?
Okay, so SBF. Realized that there was a need for or a desire, I should say, for crypto exchanges, right? So he actually made several $1 million doing an arbitrage trade. He was a trader before being a crypto guy, and in fact, by his own admission, he was never really a crypto guy. He sort of proudly declared on many podcasts that he just went wherever the money was. He also, sort of painted himself, many times to the public as like this Robin Hood type figure. I'm going to make all of this money because I want to give it all away to charity. So SBF made several $1 million on an arbitrage trade whereby he would buy tokens on one exchange and then sell them, at a spread on another exchange. And it required like opening an account in Asia and whatever. It was like somewhat complicated, but it was a well-known trade actually. That I was recently in Korea, and actually people were sort of telling me that they did the same thing on a smaller scale than SBF. But but he had more money to start with, so he made more money, and then he invested that money into FTX. And FTX, he built FTX as this sort of responsible crypto exchange, right? Right.
Apparently, they really were. Yeah.
Yeah. At this, so the point of FTX was that they were the sort of main point or the selling point for retail investors was that FTX would custody your crypto for you. And it also offered some, yields products and whatnot. But like at its heart, the idea was that it was supposed to be a broker dealer for crypto, just as Fidelity is for your stocks. So at the same time, Sam Bankman-Fried also ran or founded a hedge fund called Alameda Research. Alameda Research, ended up being run by supposedly FTX's ex-girlfriend, Caroline Ellison. And then now this is I'm mentioning this because you asked about these like frat
frat person. We call them frat persons now.
Yeah.
Frat person.
So SBF and Caroline and a group of others allegedly shared a home in the Bahamas from which they ran FTX and Alameda Research. And I'll give you like a very speed run through the recent history. in the wake of the collapse of several other exchanges, so Terra Luna, Voyager, Celsius, Sam Bankman-Fried sort of emerged as this white knight over the course of the summer, because FTX started bidding on a lot of these soured assets that really came out of the collapse of the Terra Luna ecosystem, which occurred in May. And built a lot of goodwill for himself. He also started, he bought the naming rights to the Miami Heat Arena, or it became FTX Arena. So Sam Bankman-Fried was kind of on this publicity tour over the summer, building a lot of goodwill for himself. He sort of took a bit of a misstep, I think. When I guess in September, October, he published a series of thought pieces, I guess. Really one blog followed up with a bunch of tweets on responsible crypto regulation, and also appeared before Congress to talk about it, and appeared on a number of podcasts. And in those thought pieces and on those podcasts, SBF started advocating for basically a gate-kept decentralized finance world, where instead of my being able to go to a decentralized exchange and swap my tokens, under SBF's sort of rubric, it would be effectively illegal to host a website that gave me access to one of those exchanges. I'd still be able to use it because it's all on the blockchain, but I would have to be technically adept enough to be able to use it without someone else providing a website that gave me access. Sam Bankman-Fried said, those websites should be licensed. And what a lot of people pointed out was that, he would be the one holding the licenses, because he, as an exchange founder, would be the only one with the resources really to obtain those licenses. And it also emerged that SBF was meeting with Chair Gary Gensler of the SEC, basically, promoting this idea. And he also was a very vocal proponent of a piece of legislation that would have accomplish this goal of basically gatekeeping the decentralized finance community. So the bloom sort of started to fall off the rose at that point. And then on November 2nd of 2022, so whatever, a month
and a half ago,
almost 2 months ago, CoinDesk published a FTX's balance sheet details, right? And the balance sheet details suggested some inappropriate relationship between FTX and Alameda Research, right? It suggested that maybe FTX had been sending a bunch of money over to Alameda Research. Maybe in the absence of the sort of misstep that I just described, that would have been kind of swept under the rug. But I think people were kind of at that point already looking for, they were already sort of grown suspicious of SBF as maybe not really aligned with the ethos of the crypto community. On November 6th, the CEO of Binance, which is another exchange, and in fact, the largest exchange in the world, and FTX was second before it blew up. The CEO of Binance, who goes by CZ, I can't pronounce his actual first name. He's of Chinese heritage. CZ announced on Twitter that as an early investor in FTX, CZ had a bunch, like $2 billion worth of FTT tokens. Now, FTT tokens are basically, they're like coupons to use FTX, right? Like you have FTT tokens and you can use those to pay trading fees on FTX. So they're not equity in FTX, but they're equity-like, right? Like the more people want to use FTX, in theory, the more valuable FTT tokens are. Typically, if you want to dispose of $2 billion worth of some already fairly illiquid asset, you don't announce it to the world, right? So it was sort of interesting that CZ announced this on Twitter before actually disposing of any FTT tokens. What happened after he announced this was what some people refer to as a run on the bank, but that's actually a misnomer, because remember, FTX was not supposed to be a bank in that they weren't supposed to be doing fractional reserves. They were supposed to be custodying people's property one-to-one, right? But what did occur was people started withdrawing from FTX because I think as a result of CZ's tweet and a few follow-up tweets where he did overtly kind of analogize FTX to Terra, which again had blown up in May, people sort of felt like maybe CZ knows something and decided to sort of test FTX basically. Caroline Ellison, meanwhile, tweeted, "I'll buy all your FTT for," I think it was $23 or something. And that, of course, exacerbated the run because people started thinking, well, what's so special about that price point, right? Once you sort of announce a price point, the short sellers are going to go start testing that, that support level. So that's what happened. And by November 8th, Binance and FTX announced publicly via Twitter that Binance had a non-binding letter of intent to buy FTX. So it's a very, very quick, wave of destruction that washed over FTX. November 9th, so just one day later, Binance announced that it was walking away from the deal. And that's when people realized that something had gone really, really horribly wrong, because one day worth of due diligence for Binance to walk away from the deal, is very troubling. November 11th, FTX filed for bankruptcy in the U.S. SBF stepped down as CEO, and the Financial Times reported that FTX held only $900 million in liquid assets against $9 to $10 billion of liabilities. And then on November 12th, a wave of unauthorized transactions drained several $100 million more from FTX. There apparently was some kind of backdoor. Again, this is all just public, allegations, but apparently there was a backdoor that enabled someone, we don't know who, to
it was John Carney.
Thank you.
I can reveal it here. You heard it here first.
I wish I was that rich.
That's sort of where we are. So basically, it came out that FTX did in fact have, allegedly, an inappropriate relationship with Alameda, whereby it was effectively taking customer deposits and using those to lend to Alameda to backstop Alameda against the losses that Alameda appears to have incurred in connection with crypto winter, which began when Terra Luna collapsed in May.
Okay, so to jump forward, let's see, SBF, I'm sorry, now I'm using his initials. In any event, John Carney did tell us that he's, not he, John, but SBF is on his way to a jail in Manhattan. And so I guess that's the quick end of that story. So there will be criminal, if not, it sounds like criminal charges, as well as civil, and it may bring in his family and a whole bunch of others. And I gather his parents, or at least his father's involved, and at least the Wall Street Journal has been writing that this may reach further than SBF and his.
I mean, at the end of the day, he's up on 5 charges. He waived extradition, so he's going to Brooklyn, and he's going to be in jail. It was wire fraud, conspiracy, securities fraud, conspiracy, money laundering, and I think campaign finance is next on the list. But
I don't want to make this political, but you'd have to be like an ex-president to have those charges against you.
Well, and at the end of the day, he was the second leading contributor to the Democratic Party after George Soros for the midterms. So it's got everything that the journalist community loves. This is like catnip for journalists. It's got money, it's got new technology, it's got politics, it's got all these things.
And there was a considerable amount of commentary among sort of the crypto natives regarding how like carefully the journalists tread when they were reporting about SBF. Like a lot of the headlines said stuff like, FTX collapse means that, Sam Bankman-Fried's dreams of donating to charity, are not going to come to fruition. Things like that, where like rather than focusing on this alleged massive fraud, the journalists were sort of focused more on SBF's good deeds, which people found very suspicious.
Well, okay, so now we're going to tell Amir he's on mute, and you give him a little warning there, and where John's already unmuted. To what extent this recording is being done under the auspices of the Licensing Executive Society? So the question is, what does this have to do with licensing at all? And so I will throw this question in to the both of you. To what extent should and this is a stretch, but we're trying to make sure our sponsor is happy. To what extent should a party to a license, so it would be a license or a licensee, worry that the other party doesn't merely run the usual risks of foreclosure, bankruptcy, or other sort of financial disruption, which is, I hope, reasonably accounted for in our boilerplate sort of foreclosure provisions, but are there special steps that somebody should take? For example, at least getting a rep and warranty, whatever good that would do, that I'll call you business partner or the other folks on the other side of the table are not heavily into crypto? Here we go. I got a question out I've been thinking about for a while. I pulled it in. Amir, we're going to ask you first because I'm sure you have not thought about this at all. So let's hear you mumble for a bit.
Well, no, I mean, I think the issue is it depends on the type of company. I mean, Jason knows we work together on a number of transactions where this is actually the central issue, where Jason and I have sort of worked together to understand the target's, nature and use of crypto. And in some cases, we've had some pretty strong follow-up questions and conclusions, and have thought that maybe this is not what the people promulgating this technology say it is. What I think the biggest impact, so I think it's less of a diligence exercise in that respect, because I think you typically are going to know the companies that will ultimately cease doing business. It's generally the case that crypto will be front and center in their business plan. So I don't think there will be hidden surprises for licensees. I think the bigger risk or issue are for people who have announced, plans around digital assets or digital transformations. The real question is, what do the Fortune 500, right, think about this crypto winter and the chill, and what does it mean for their digital transformation plans? What does it mean for digital assets going forward? Is the class of the digital asset dead? I think you would hear, Jason say no. I also think the answer is no. I think it's a part of an evolution. I mean, look, all of us involved in high tech, I've been involved in disruptive technologies my entire career. There is a life cycle. I haven't met the disruptive technology which grows in a linear fashion, right? So I think what is a little bit different about crypto is the fact that you had there began to be a number of speculators involved in the ecosystem, and we haven't really seen that with other technologies per se. We saw analogs of it with the in the late 90s with internet, but you didn't have people speculating per se on servers or hard drives or like internet bandwidth, although I want to qualify that because you kind of did in some respects, but broadly speaking, people were not speculating on the internet, right, or the idea of connected services. Here you had a lot of speculation on real or imagined underlying assets themselves. And I think that's what makes this a little bit different. And that's where it's worth going back to Jason's bifurcation of what we're talking about. Are we talking about tokens, like just tokens such as Bitcoin, right, which has, again, we're both going to get in trouble for this, but no real utility other than the being a purported fiat currency, and something like Ethereum, which is sort of built in its DNA this notion of utility and ability to use that token to register information on a blockchain. And so, what we're seeing in the market now. So what does all this mean? What we're seeing in the market now is that the crypto natives, right, those who are really in this ecosystem, those who are building technologies and platforms to the extent that they can still afford to do that are continuing. What I think you're seeing are the people outside of that circle of crypto natives, the onlookers who are looking into the circle. They're taking a step back. So you're seeing licensees of platforms, licensees of information. I represent a few wallets, and so digital wallets, and so a lot of times this technology will not have been developed by people who are providing wallet services. They will license the underlying technology and then make that available to customers. You're seeing demand for those types of things decrease. You're seeing, again, less of the Fortune 500 interested in making this quick and immediate conversion using crypto per se. What will happen in the future will be, I think, that digitization and technology will move forward, right? This is just sort of one facet of a digital technology advancement, and you'll see digital assets, I think, broadly move forward. It may not look exactly like it did in 2021 or 2020, but I think you've got the Visas, the MasterCards, you've got traditional banks, those who had been playing a game of catch up. I think they have a little bit more time now, and I think you have the ability for people looking to implement these technologies. You have the ability to be a little bit more thoughtful about the implementations. But I think statements such as announcing the death of digital assets, that's probably overblown.
Okay, let me get this question in because we're going to lose Jason. John, am I correct that you have done deals where international deals where the currency was not dollars but was actually, I think you said it was Bitcoin?
Incorrect. China specifically outlaws Bitcoin transactions, so you can't use Bitcoin in China. Between 2019 and 2020, there was capital flight coming out of Asia, and the Chinese government carefully controls currency. So,
any cryptocurrency? Did you have any deal that used cryptocurrency as the transaction medium? I
have gone to cocktail parties, sir, in China where digital currency was discussed, but it was always on a personal basis. Oh. No deals that I'm aware of use currency that's not sanctioned by the full faith and credit of a national government. So
okay, so let's redo this podcast in 10 years, and we'll revisit that question.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, people were using it to circumvent the $50,000 limit, and people that had huge amounts of money tied up in real estate in China and could only move $50,000 a year were locked from doing that. You needed 4 approvals to move currency. I mean, I did a $100 million deal involving the sale of a Delphi business. It took 4 approvals from the Chinese government to move that kind of money, and it's because they want to regulate the flow of hard currency out of China.
Okay. Thank you, gentlemen. We'll the show notes, to the extent they exist, will show our LinkedIn links, and appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Take care.